I appreciate you taking the time today. Now, First Liberty Institute filed a charge of discrimination with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission against Bath and Body Works. This is a really interesting case. Take us through what happened that led to that filing.
Absolutely. So at First Liberty, we represent Jocelyn Boden. She was a store manager for over 3 years at a Utah branch of Bath and Body Works. And when a transgender employee started working at her store, after just one shift, Jocelyn treated her well, treated her like everyone else, was willing to use names or nicknames. But the only problem is she could not use pronouns in a way that was inconsistent with her religious and moral beliefs. And because of that, there was an HR complaint that was filed, and she was immediately investigated and fired.
So this individual was hired, I believe, in April, and the firing happened by May. So it was relatively quick. That's accurate, right? That timeline?
That's right. So this only happened a few months ago.
What was the official reason that Jocelyn was given for her firing?
It was a violation of their policies, accusing her of discrimination because of the pronoun issue.
So she came to a place where she was willing to use the preferred name of the person, right? You may change your name if you identify as transgender to something else, but not use the non-biological pronouns, just to recap. So she was willing to use the name, but not the pronouns.
That's right.
So, this is an interesting situation. What is the policy, and I'm sure you would know this at this point, of Bath and Body Works when it comes to the pronoun issue? Do they have an official one?
Well, what they did is they didn't have any sort of interactive process. There was no process for figuring out how to accommodate Jocelyn. It was you have to use these pronouns or you're going to be fired. And when it was clear that she could not use these because of her religious and moral beliefs, they just terminated her. So that was their policy. And we strongly believe that this violates both state and federal law, and that's why we filed our EEOC charge.
So what should the store have done from your perspective in this case in handling it? Because these situations are happening all of the time. This is just one example of them. And even if Bath and Body Works does have a policy that is very stringent, it still opens up the question of, well, if you have a religious perspective, should you get an exemption, right? So what should have happened from your perspective in this case?
Right. Bath and Body Works should have found a way to respect all of its employees and to figure out a way to live up to its ideals of inclusivity and tolerance. So a simple solution would have simply been to allow Jocelyn to use names instead of pronouns, or even allow her to use names consistent with her religious beliefs, or pronouns consistent with her religious beliefs. So the legal standard here is employers are required to provide religious accommodations unless they meet a very narrow exception. So unless they can show that granting that accommodation would cause undue hardship, which is defined as substantial increased costs to the company. And so allowing her to use names instead of pronouns wouldn't cause substantial increased costs. So therefore, that's what employers should do.
So when we look at a case like this, from your perspective, you obviously have federal law and you have state law, and every state is different in how they handle these issues. What do you believe was violated statewide versus, federal? What laws do you believe may have been violated in this case?
Yeah, that's an important question. You're right. Every state is different. In Utah, there's actually a very helpful law that provides protections for religious and moral expression, unless there's certain narrow exceptions that are met. So essentially, if it's not disruptive, not harassing your other employees, then you're able to freely engage in religious or moral expression and can't be fired because of that.
So when you look at the way that this works now, you file with the EEOC. For those who don't understand, what is the benefit or the purpose for starting there, for filing this complaint with the EEOC?
So most employment discrimination claims have to start out going through the EEOC if you want to ultimately end up in federal court. So you have to go to the EEOC first, and then once the EEOC is finished with that, with the case, they'll give you what's called a right to sue letter, and then you can go to federal court. And so a lot of times there are state agencies that are similar to the EEOC in almost every state, and they'll work together to investigate your charge. And they take up a very few of them on their own, and they actually initiate litigation against the company sometimes.
So, yeah, that was another question, too. Is there a world in which the EEOC comes back? Do they have the authority to punish, a company, or to say, hey, to sort of resolve the situation for you so that you don't need to go to federal court? Or is that not something under the purview of the EEOC?
Yes, they can do, so sort of, I guess I'll clarify. They have an ability to try to work things out with the employer and to try to reach an agreement between the employer and the employee to resolve the matter. And if that doesn't work, then they have the ability to essentially represent the employee's interests in court and bring a lawsuit on behalf of the EEOC against the employer.
So what do you want to see happen next? You filed this with the EEOC. What are you hoping is the next development in this case?
So we are hopeful that the EEOC will actually take this case up and decide that this is an important case for them to litigate against Bath and Body Works. But barring that, we're hopeful that we will pursue this case and receive a just outcome for Jocelyn and because we know there are so many other employees that are facing similar circumstances, and we need more clarity in the law here.
So can you just, before we go, explain, how this has affected Jocelyn? Because you obviously, she had a job, she's working, she's managing this store, she's terminated. There are emotional, there are also practical, I would imagine, implications for what that has meant for her life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it really upends your expectations. All of a sudden, you don't have your livelihood that you're depending on. And it's only been a couple of months so far, but she's had to explain to friends and family that she's willing to take this stand because she couldn't violate her principles. And she had to choose between her faith and her job, and she made the choice to choose her faith and to stay true to that. She mentioned the other day that she would encourage other people to stand up for their convictions, and that things will sort themselves out if they just have faith in that.
Well, I appreciate you breaking this down. We'll continue to cover this story. It is an important one. We're seeing more and more of these clashes between, policies at a company or an organization and in individuals, exercise of their religious liberty. And so there are a lot of different issues sort of floating around in these cases, but I appreciate you joining us to break it all down today.
Of course. Thank you for covering it.